On this episode of the WildFed podcast.
Nobody's a bigger fan of bears than me. When they wake up in the morning, their job that day is to find the most calories they can and spend the least calories doing it.
Unlike a lion that's going to take just livestock or a deer that's going to take just your grains, you've got this massive animal that'll take either one, right? Because he's sort of this fantastic omnivore.
It's a full-time job for them. They're up to 20,000 calories a day that comes through them.
I hunt them pretty heavily now. I love eating them, but I feel a little bit differently about bears.
They do something that no other animal does. They're able to lower their heart rate that's 8 beats per minute.
Wow. People seem to think that black bears are almost like an endangered species or something.
There's more misinformation about bears than there is real information. We wouldn't have any trouble controlling the bear population if all the rednecks figured out how good bears are to eat.
Episode number 38 of the WildFed podcast, The Black Ghost. 37 years working with black bears with Randy Cross is brought to you by Surthrival. Surthrival is the premier nutrition company for those committed to adaptation in our rapidly changing health environment. This summer's a critical moment to develop robust health by supertuning your metabolism, building lean body mass, and reformatting your immune system. Remember, winter is coming. From now until July 16th, take an additional 15% off Surthrival's Pine Pollen Pure Potency and elk antler products with the coupon code RESTORE15. The rapidly growing velvet antler of elk and deer are a rich source of growth factors that metabolically supertune you for optimal function and recovery. Surthrival's formula is based on the Russian Cold War era research into creating super athletes. Elk antler is a premier source of collagen for restoring your connective tissue matrix and is renowned for treating iron deficiencies, building lean muscle mass, and enhancing oxygen utilization. If you train or you're recovering from injuries or surgery, it's a perfect ally for incredibly rapid healing. Surthrival's Pine Pollen Pure Potency is nature's testosterone replacement. This product was developed as an alternative to the pharmaceutical hormone replacement therapy used for andropause, utilizing the testosterone contained in pine pollen along with other powerful herbs to unlock and access your body's natural testosterone too. Again, from now until July 16th, the coupon code RESTORE15 gets you 15% off your order. Surthrival is empowerment fuel. Check out the lineup at surthrival.com. Hey, thanks for all those 5-star ratings and the incredible reviews over at iTunes. Listen, you only have to do this once to move the needle on how the show gets put in front of new listeners. You just go over to iTunes and hit the 5-star rating, assuming you think that we warrant it, and then write up a short but honest review, and you're done. You're done. Anytime you hear me asking, you can think to yourself, I'm all set. I've already given a little back to support Daniel and the WildFed team and their mission. It's instant gratification. And please know, we read all those reviews, and they mean a lot to us. I'm Daniel Vitalis, and you're listening to the WildFed podcast, a show about reconnecting with nature through hunting, fishing, foraging, and food. WildFed. Food is all around you. Well, hey, I've got a really special episode for you today. There's some interviews that I never forget. They're conversations that I revisit again and again, and today's show is definitely one of those. For 37 years, Randy Cross led Maine's famous black bear monitoring and management program. He's a local legend here, and no conversation about bears in the Northeast is complete without his name at least coming up. Not only did I get to sit down with him for a candid conversation, but it was just 2 weeks before he retired, making this podcast a wonderful summation of his long and celebrated career. When Randy talks about bears, whether in person, on television, or radio, people listen. For almost 4 decades, he's not just been monitoring black bears, but working up their winter dens, visiting den sites and actually pulling female bears and their cubs out to physically examine them. It's all part of the science that makes Maine a leading voice in black bear conservation. And because of his work, we've got an incredible track record here. Despite an annual harvest averaging around 3,000 bears, the state not only boasts a population of more than 35,000 black bears, but that population is continuing to grow and expand in range. As a bear hunter here in the state, I've personally benefited from the work Randy's done, not just on the conservation of black bears themselves, but also from the work he's done to preserve our hunting heritage through his efforts to maintain baiting, trapping, and hounding as the state's 3 most important management tools on our densely forested landscape. While every species is fascinating when you start to look closely at their life history, there's something about black bears that really speaks to the soul. I think part of that's just how anthropomorphic bears are. When you watch them for any length of time, you inevitably see behaviors you can relate to. It's like you can understand, or at least you feel like you can understand, what they're thinking and why they're doing whatever it is that they're doing. Those of us who hunt and eat them know that a black bear with his hide off looks remarkably like a person. The head, hands, and feet are a bit different, but the rest of them is quite recognizable. So much so that it's common to meet hunters who won't hunt or eat them, often saying that it's just a bit too close to home. But as you'll hear Randy discuss here, the meat of the black bear might just be the most underutilized and underappreciated game meat of all. When well cared for, it's the mildest, easiest eating red meat. Add to that the incredible, silky smooth, monounsaturated oil you can render from their body fat, and you have what might be the most important animal in the North American subsistence hunter's repertoire. Black bear was the first big game animal I ever hunted and learned to butcher. So for me, getting to sit down with Randy and doing a deep dive into all my accumulated questions was an incredible experience. The man is nearly a black bear incarnate. And you get a sense around him that the archetype of the animal has become fused with who he is as a person. Hey, as a side note, if you love this episode and you want to learn more about black bears, I recommend revisiting episode 3 of the WildFed podcast, Mean Gene, Pisleys, and Habitat Design with one of Randy's colleagues, bear biologist Deb Perkins. Like Randy, Deb spent her career working with bears, and we speak to her at length about them in that episode too. Lastly, with bear season just a few months away, now's the time to start putting a plan together if you'd like to hunt bears in 2020. Take some time to look over your state's bear hunting season, laws, and bag limits. Are tags available over the counter, or are they by lottery? What are the strategies that lead to success where you live or hunt? Does your state publish its bear management plan? If so, have a look at it. Learn all you can. Find mentors or hunting partners in your area. Bears are incredible animals to hunt, eat, and most of all, to interact with. You just don't want a collection of scars that match Randy's. But then again, you probably won't be waking lactating sows up from their winter slumber.
All right, I'm here with my producer, Grant Giuliano, and we are sitting with the illustrious, kind of a local celebrity here in the state of Maine, Randy Cross of the Maine Black Bear Project. Welcome, Randy, and thank you so much for having us down to your lab here.
No, thank you.
Is it true that you're wrapping up a 30-year
37.
career? 37 years.
Yeah, 37 years.
Of doing, is it the Maine Black Bear Project, or is that just one small part of what you do overall?
I wouldn't say it's a small part. I think it's probably 3/4 of what I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you kind of just give us a sort of summary of like who you are and what your work here has been at the department?
Well, I guess in summary, I have been working with the Black Bear Project. That is a long-term monitoring project that we do with black bears. Right now we have 3 active study areas, and involves visiting bear dens in the winter and counting cubs and counting yearlings, and doing all kinds of measurements, of course, as well, and also trapping in the spring, trapping bears for 6-7 weeks every spring.
Yeah. Why black bears? Like, how did you get involved with black bears?
Well, I'm not sure if that, that's hard. That's a hard one to answer, but I feel very fortunate to have been able to spend my career working with black bears. A pretty fascinating animal. Yeah.
When did it come across your radar? Like, when did bears first start to come into your world?
It really didn't occur to me that I would ever really be working with black bears. While I was in college, I talked to Roy Hughey, who at that time was doing his PhD work at the university studying bears in Maine, and asked him about the possibility of working for him.
You were a biology student at the time?
Yeah, I was an undergrad.
Did you have any sense of like what you thought you wanted to do at the time?
Well, no, not really. Just very intensely interested in wildlife.
Okay. Were you a hunter, fisherman growing up?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
grew up on wild game meat. I just told people this over and over, and it's not it's not something that was that unusual in the area in central coastal Maine
Right.
where I grew up. But I grew up on wild game, and that's what we ate. We had deer in the freezer, but we rabbit hunted all winter, and ice fished, and I ate rabbits and pickerel and deer, and
Yeah.
raccoons in the fall.
Did you? Yeah.
It was my favorite, actually.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't talk to too many people. Sometimes down in the south that eat them.
Yeah, it's common,
Yeah.
in areas.
Yeah.
My mom could make some roast raccoon.
No kidding.
Oh yeah, make your knees weak. That's
I'd love to try that.
Yeah. That sounds good.
that's my recollection. I think I probably ate the last roasted raccoon hindquarters when I was like 14 years old. So it's been a little while.
Yeah. Yeah. That's neat though. So you grew up doing all that, and you kind of figured out at some point that if you went into biology, you could be in the field, or how'd that come about for you?
Well, I think it sort of started with it. Starting a career in the guiding business.
Oh, okay. So you were guiding first.
Right.
Oh, no kidding.
And guiding canoe trips for
Okay.
5 years full time. And I think that probably helped me get my first field job trapping bears.
Okay. Yeah. Right. So you got trapping bears, and this was while you were still in school?
Nope. I had been out of school for 3 years.
Oh, okay. Tell me about it.
Well,
Had you hunted bear before that, or were you
no.
involved with black bears? Had you?
no, central coastal Maine, we don't really have. We have an occasional bear that
Yeah,
someone
okay.
sees, somewhere, but it wasn't really available, so didn't really know much about it. So to me, it was not a lot different from something you might read in an outdoor magazine about
Right.
hunting Cape buffalo or something.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
Because
Exotic to you.
yeah, we just did all of our hunting, within probably 10 miles of home,
Yeah.
and an awful lot of hunting right behind my house. you
Right.
know?
Right. Yeah.
And no vehicles involved, just,
Yeah.
walking out and seeing what, nature could provide. you know?
Okay. So at some point you got on this project.
Yeah, and I think really lucky how things all fell in place for me, but always gave it my all, and I guess that was just good enough.
What were they doing at the time? Was the project initiated yet, or?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I came in midstream.
Okay. So what's the sort of origin story of the project?
Well, it did start with Roy Hughey
Okay.
in 1975, doing his doctorate work, the first research on black bears in Maine. And in 1982, George Matula took over. We had some question on the harvest was going up, and with our limited knowledge, we weren't sure if we could continue harvesting at the rate that that increase was concerning. So the department decided to make a sincere effort to get a better handle on what's going on with bears in Maine, and George was the one that started that, and George is the one that hired me because it had expanded. Intensity was increased and took over for Roy, and we established a second study area, or actually at that time it was a third study area, and I got on just when it kind of expanded.
Okay.
There was expanded opportunity at that time.
And Maine was just concerned that they were going to have to change regulations in order to sustain.
Right, we had
The population.
we had an emergency closure in the fall of 1980.
Okay.
So that all set it into effect.
That was triggered by the harvest rate?
Right.
Okay.
Increasing harvest rate and concerns whether that was an overharvest or not.
And what did they end up determining?
They determined, our intense studies that began in '82 convinced us that there were many more bears than what. When you don't know much about an animal, you're going to be conservative.
Yeah.
The more you know, the closer to the target you can get without staying up nights worrying about if you overshoot.
Yeah. Okay. So now the project's been running how long?
75, 40.
Almost 45.
Almost 45 years.
Wow. And we've learned a lot then, I assume, because I've come into it about 5 years ago, into the hunt, and really, like you were saying, I mean, I just didn't know anything about black bears.
Yeah.
And what I've noticed is that a lot of people, because it's interesting if you if you share bear hunting with people outside of that world, I mean, as you are, I'm sure, acutely aware, it just triggers a whole lot of responses that you might not expect. And one that really surprised me was that a lot of people seem to think that black bears are almost like an endangered species or something. So I was wondering if we could kind of start off by, maybe if you could imagine, like, the audience here, some people will be from this area, but a lot of people are going to be from other countries, like, let's say, places where kangaroos live, or places where they call moose elk, and they are not familiar with this animal. So could you give us like a briefing, a big picture, maybe about black bears, a little bit about where they fit in the genus, and sort of what their range and distribution's like, and then maybe we could zero in on Maine a little bit and talk about what the situation here in the Northeast and in Maine in particular is.
Okay, black bears are one of 3 bear species that occur in North America. They're the most widespread and the most abundant of any bear species in the world, and there are 8 bear species in the world. We have, just in Maine, we have over 36,000 black bears. Maine's, for people who aren't familiar with the states, is maybe roughly 300 miles by 300 miles. So it's not huge, but their black bear population is gaining ground almost everywhere across North America, where they were once decreased in number. Never endangered.
Have they ever been pushed or out of or extirpated from any of their range? Like with brown bears, for instance, they've been extirpated from a lot of their range.
True.
And they even have ESA protection in some places, right? With black bears, is there anywhere that was their range? And can you describe the range a little bit as well? But have they been, or do they still occupy their pre-Columbian range?
I would say not yet. Quite. They occur pretty much everywhere where there's significant forest cover.
Okay.
All from the tree line in northern Canada all the way into Mexico.
Okay, so it's all the way up until where they're getting into the high boreal.
Totally. Yeah.
And then all the way down to where did you say?
Into Mexico.
Wow.
Yeah.
We talked to Deb Perkins recently, and she was describing, bears in New Mexico that she worked with, and I was sort of had to like wrap my mind around the idea that they occupied those kind of regions. I just hadn't really pictured black bears that far south before.
Right. And on the West Coast, they weren't reduced in number as significantly and range wise as they were on the East Coast with all the settlement that came earlier on the East Coast.
Okay.
And they're not particularly compatible with farming and agricultural society that depends heavily on agriculture.
Because of conflict or because of the changes to the habitat?
Conflict, when the settlers came here, they really didn't have crops that they could share with the wildlife, and bears being one of the ones that caused the most trouble. They needed that corn to get through the winter. They really couldn't allow the bears to eat 3/4 of their corn. They were they were managing black bears as soon as they landed here as
Okay.
as a major competitor, and of course.
And they would not have been familiar with this species, right? Because the species is unique
No.
to North America.
You're right.
Or is
That
this
would be different.
Americanum, is it?
Americanus.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, and they would lose livestock, and so not just crops.
Yeah,
So for a family to lose a cow or a calf, that was difficult. So a lot of these people back then, survival was a struggle.
And you got this massive animal that does. It's not unlike, let's say, a lion that's going to take just livestock, or a deer that's going to take just your grains. You've got this big animal who can eat a lot, and it'll take either one, right? Because he's sort of this fantastic, like us, a fantastic omnivore. Right?
Yeah, right. Very opportunistic in there. Yeah, foraging.
And you were saying their range basically is anywhere that there's good canopy.
Yeah, contiguous forest cover.
That's what they need.
Yeah, and
that would distinguish them from, let's say, the brown bear that
yes,
is more of an open plains animal.
More open, circumpolar in distribution, so it occurs on all the continents around. And polar bears also circumpolar, Arctic regions.
Right.
But black bears are, unique to North America, but some of the like the Asiatic black bear and the sun bear, they're very similar species in other continents.
Okay.
But most of those, all the other bears have some problems with their populations, either in certain parts of their range that are more severe than black bears. Black bears have never been severely
Why is that?
I think partly, they were so widespread, and they're not particularly easy to hunt.
Yeah, that's true.
and that that is probably one of the biggest things. We had a bounty on black bears in Maine up until 1957, as they were viewed as nothing positive, all negative.
Just nuisance animal.
Environment, yeah.
So this is the tail end of the era where it was like, get rid of wolves, get rid of coyotes, get rid of lions. Just predator control was a major part of the sort of management of the landscape, right?
Remove that competition, and bears suffered some of that through, especially the East Coast that became settled early, and
the heavy deforestation that was happening.
Yes, and fairly significant habitat alteration. Like where I grew up in central Waldo County, there were no large tracts of forests around 1870. Mm-hmm. So there's no place for a bear to hide at that point. But when they have places to hide, they have forest. They always persisted everywhere.
Yeah. And how much range does, let's say, a male black bear and then maybe a female black bear, how much space do they need to live comfortably?
Well, a female's pretty easy to describe, and it's like usually not a perfect circle. But if you thought of an oblong piece of ground, kind of oval shaped, is very common, where it's like 3.5 miles long and 2.5 miles wide. They're very loyal to their home range. And they'll go outside of it, but they don't often go outside their home range, and they know it very well. Males cover so much ground, more like 15 miles in diameter. And it's hard to define a male's home range. They do cover a lot of ground. It's hard to know if they're in their home range or if they're actually on a trip, because they cover so much ground.
So they have to be a little more enterprising.
Yeah, they're pretty footloose, and they know a lot of country, especially the large males. So when they're younger, they don't cover as much ground other than the normal dispersal from their natal range. So they'll always disperse, and they'll hobnob around for a while. But once they become mature, they'll have areas that are focal points of activity, but they'll cover a lot of ground.
Do they have food areas that they revisit each part of the year, like in the spring, they know the food's good here, in the summer,
Right.
and they do that over and over again?
Yeah, a black bear's job, and we're just anthropomorphizing here and making a little bit of a joke, but when they wake up in the morning, their job that day is to find the most calories they can and spend the least calories doing it.
Yeah.
And they do that every day.
Okay.
That's sort of, well, I shouldn't say every day, but they only feed for six or 7 months.
Wow.
And so the other months they're in the den, they're not feeding. So during that foraging period from spring to fall, they are super focused on that. And food dictates where the different foods are available, different times of the year. That dictates where they are and what they're doing, because it's a full-time job for them.
Yeah. I want to go into the life history a little bit, but since you just brought that up, I'm curious, like, we're at right now, it's October the 17th. I've been on, let's say, 9 successful bear hunts this season, and I've seen 8 really lean bears. I'd say 7 really lean bears, 1 bear that was starting to accumulate fat, but it was like where the tissue is still a lot of fiber in it. And then 1 bear, when she was like, had that 4 inches of fat that is like butter that just melts in your hand and has no, feels like it has no tissue in it. It's just pure lard, right?
Yeah.
Now this is a year where we have a great hard mass. There's good acorns, there's good beech nuts, there's good soft mass this year, and apples and things like that. The cherry season was really good. Last year was like one of the sparsest year in memory, as far as no acorns, no beech nuts, no apples, right? It was a weak year. Why are there's so many lean bears this late into the season, and how is that related to food? And why would there be this female who's just so fat? I mean, like a round bear, that I saw.
Yeah. You might not like the answer, but
Lay it on me.
it's very difficult to explain why bears are lean when food is abundant and why they're fat when food is not. But that happens every fall, and one direction or the other, and different intensities. But on an early den year like last year, they den when they're spending more calories foraging than what they're consuming. So they're technically they're starving.
Okay.
So when they start
Starving being defined as more calories burned than taking in, even if that's subtle.
Yeah. And if that persists for a certain period of time, the body recognizes that this is a losing battle, and so the body shuts down. So the body flips a switch. They start getting lazy, so they're not expending that energy foraging, and the next thing they're preparing a den, and they're going to just cash it in and try to save as much as they can, as opposed to continuing to try to get food and gain fat.
So metabolically they shift as well, where just their body starts putting those calories that they do get into fat stores versus
Right.
what, like, are the lean bears right now still accumulating muscle mass then?
Muscle and skeletal growth.
So they're like grow.
Yeah.
If there's food, grow, and when that food starts getting low, get fat?
Exactly.
Really? Yeah.
I'm surprised you picked up on that, because it is just like to wrap your brain around that.
And that's from the year prior to denning, or
It's
this current year?
Oh, well, last year, most of my females in my northern study area were entering their dens between September 20th and 25th.
Wow, so early.
So it's an early year, and it's still
Because there was no food.
Still during bait season.
And so they were trying to fatten up as early in the season as
They were
could.
they were putting fat on and priming up the first week of the bait season, and because what I don't really understand about it is it seems so predictive, because how do they know if there's going to be some more food available in October? But they are, they're all in sync. They're all doing the same thing. And usually when you see that first pregnant female go into the den, the other ones follow pretty quickly. They go in groups, but they're all eating off the same table. There's no, there's very little variation between what one bear can find and the next. They all have that same job. Get up in the morning, spend the least amount of calories to get the most calories back.
Okay, but for like a male bear, it's important to be big, right? Is that
super important?
So hence, if there's a lot of food around, I'm going to get jacked instead of trying to get fat right now, because if I can get some size, I can dominate an area. Is that what it is, or how does that work?
No, it's not so much territorial area. It's more breeding rights.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, but even the females' body size is to their advantage long term. Putting on fat takes less calories than putting on muscle and bone. Mm-hmm. So a large bear can gain at least up to 4 pounds a day of fat. A lot of that's water in the fat too. But
4 pounds a day
on a large bear, yeah. I've
got. Wow. So they don't need that much time to get real fat.
Yeah, exactly. And I have seen many examples of that. The larger males, the biggest bears out there, are at the bottom of their weight swing towards the end of June. Through the breeding season, they spend a lot of energy, waste energy, not waste it, but they're using energy and during breeding, covering a lot of ground.
Okay.
And
what time of year is that?
In June.
Yeah.
And as soon as the breeding kind of slows up, so they have from around the 1st of July to who knows exactly when to recover from that.
So like a deer in the rut, they burn themselves
Yeah.
down. They use a lot of their fuel.
Yeah.
Exhaust themselves a little bit.
Yeah.
But unlike a deer, comes out of that and it's wintertime. It's
coming.
like he's got all fall to recover.
Yeah. So,
Will the sows be bred by multiple males?
That's common, but according to genetic work, most litters are by one male bear.
Okay. Do we know how what mechanism determines if she's bred multiple times?
It's they're.
Because I've heard something about their ability to. Is it like selectively implant or?
No, it's delayed implantation.
Oh, delayed implantation. Okay, yeah.
And that is a decision that the body makes just about at the time of den entry. It's an all or nothing. They either implant all of the embryos,
or none.
Or none.
Okay, so if she's got 4 fertilized embryos, she's going to have 4 cubs. She can't. Her body's not going to go. Let's do 3 of these based on.
Yeah.
Okay, it's all or nothing.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah, and that's based on her condition.
Okay.
At the time of going in the den, and as long as it looks like a fair chance she can pull it off, they'll implant.
Okay.
And in Maine, we have a healthy bear population. At this point in time, seeing adult females skip is very rare. We have seen it. Last year was a poor food year, but it was nowhere near as poor as 1995.
Okay.
1995, at this point anyway, is still the mark for the worst food year, the dark days for bears.
How did that affect the population?
Well, it's kind of a blip, really. But we had, as is often the case, when you have a really poor food year, it's followed up by a fantastic year.
Yeah.
And that happened in 1996 was the strongest food year that I think in my career, starting in 1983, that I've seen. So we can only compare food years, natural food years, with by measuring yearling weights. And so then we can measure yearlings in the den this winter and compare that to yearlings in the den in 1997.
So you're not going good year based on how many nuts I see in the trees. You're going good year based on how much these cubs weigh.
Right. It's a very sensitive measure because those cubs come out of the den at 6 or 7 pounds, right? Okay. Every year. And they come out like in the nearest study area here around the 1st of April. And they have 6 months of feeding, 6 or 7 months of feeding, depending on when they den. And those cubs can be 20 pounds average, 25 pounds average, or they can be 65 pounds average.
Okay.
Big difference.
Yeah.
And so on a poor food year, they're going to average a much lower weight, and on a good natural food year, they're going to be way up there. I expect this year to see 65 pound average for our yearlings,
okay.
based on what I'm seeing.
Right.
But that's a little predictive, and there's a lot of variation. If you have an 18-year-old female that happens to only have 2 cubs, those cubs are going to weigh 80 pounds, and you have a 5-year-old female that has 2 cubs, those cubs are going to weigh 43 pounds,
Yeah.
So it the size of the mother, the size of the yearlings reflect the size of the mother quite a bit, because an 18-year-old
How much
female,
she has.
She has a lot of milk to provide. When
Okay.
they come out of the den, they're on milk for a while, primarily.
And that milk is the energy to produce that milk's being drawn off her fat stores.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the bigger she is, the
Yeah.
better off she's going to be. So
Okay. So when a bear is hunted in this time of year, a sow is taken, we don't know how. There's no way for us as hunters to know if she's implanted or not, or is she not even implanted yet?
no,
She might be bred, but not. She's delayed
exactly,
implantation.
She wouldn't be there. The egg gets fertilized. It splits 3 times, and that makes an 8-cell blastocyst. It's not really technically it's not an embryo.
Okay.
It's like a fertilized egg that's split 3 times. It's floating free in the uterus.
Okay.
And
she just hangs on to that all season.
yeah,
Forages.
it's a long time. Yeah.
That's neat.
And then
That's
as they enter the den, then that if they were injured somehow or they weren't doing well, they just have lost no energy.
Okay.
They just won't implant. So
if you have a bad year like 95, will you have like 1 year of low recruitment?
yeah, you do. Yeah, followed by this unbelievable
Great
year of recruitment and survival. Recruitment is to us really.
Can you define that real quick too for
Okay.
folks? Yep.
Recruitment is new bears entering the population through reproduction. With most animals, you're talking about the young of the year being born and making it through to the winter, and then they're entering the population. For bears, because we get to count cubs, and then at 1 year old, they go in the den with the mother that fall. And so we're able to count yearlings too. So cub survival is actually tends to be more important than the number of cubs born.
Okay.
So we think of a recruitment as yearlings, which come out of the den with the mother, out of the second den, not the one they were born in, but the one the second year they spent with the mother.
And so a lot of what I know about bears is what I hear from hunters, which I trust about maybe half of, And so I'm hoping today I can dispel some of those things. But one thing that I always hear is that so they're having cubs every other year, ideally, because they have the cub the 1 year, and then the second year they're raising up the yearling and bringing that yearling to den. Is that a hard rule, or is that
pretty much? Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, that's correct. They give birth in January.
To little, like maybe people would be surprised to know, but we're not to little hairy bears, right? Can you describe what they give birth to?
Outside of marsupials, the largest differential between mother and offspring is bears.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, they're
that's
very,
neat.
very small, size of a red squirrel. Fit them in a coffee cup with their head sticking out. I think that's descriptive enough. But they're pretty small.
Yeah, I remember the guide's test is really specific, 8 ounces, hairless and blind, I think is what they say.
Yeah. Yeah, they're relatively undeveloped when they're born, but they have nowhere to go, and they just drink milk and sleep and grow.
Are they in the same state that the mother's in, that torpor state? Or are they sort of more alert?
No.
Because I see pictures of you guys and video of you guys, holding them out in the winter, coming out of the den, and they look just alert and playful.
Oh, yeah, they're wide awake, yeah. But so is the mother by the time we get there. They're
So they're not like hibernating for real. They're just
No.
actually just sleeping.
I think similar to puppies. They eat and sleep,
Yeah.
wrestle a little. As they get older, they play around.
All
you
right.
know, a little
But they
bit
sort
more.
of come up a little bit in the den over the winter.
Yeah.
That's neat.
Yeah.
That's so neat.
And the mothers, basically bears, when they do something that no other animal does during hibernation, they're able to lower their physical processes, like a heart rate that's 8 beats per minute, for instance.
Wow.
So several seconds between each heartbeat
Wow.
and 2 or 3 breaths a minute, and all of that saving energy. But at the same time, they're very aware of their surroundings.
Yeah.
And so most
It's like a
hibernators,
meditative state almost.
yeah, it's totally different. They hear the slightest sound. They're
No
processing it. So in my career, I've been to hundreds of dens, and I have actually looked at a bear sleeping very few times. Probably can almost count it on one hand.
Wow. No
Those
way.
bears are always looking back at you,
They know
and they
you're
always
there.
know you're there.
You ever been hurt by one?
Oh yeah, I've been hurt a few times. I got scars.
Oh, yeah.
Those are my best ones on
Oh
this
yeah, I
side.
want to see that.
Yeah, scars are better than tattoos.
Oh, that's cool.
I don't know if you can see it.
That's cool. You got a couple there, right?
Yeah.
You got caught by a couple claws.
Yeah, different. Yeah.
Oh, that's neat.
How big can a litter be?
What we see in Maine, we haven't seen a 5 cub litter. It's probably just a matter of time, but we
You
see
get them to the south.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. More like New Jersey, Pennsylvania, tend to be a little more productive, bigger females, less time in the den, more variety of food, a little faster growing. We're seeing 4 as our most, it's prime age females, and we're talking between 10 and 20 years old, will fairly commonly produce 4 cubs, but we still haven't seen a 5 cub litter. Younger bears, more 1 or 2, like first litters are more commonly 1 or 2. And when they're very old, right towards the end of their productive years, they usually go back down to 2 or 1. 1 is so common, the last litter is just that one little cub, and then she doesn't have it in her.
How long into her life?
She's about 25.
When she stops breeding.
Yeah, be about her
She'll have that last cub.
last cub, yeah.
You got a question, Grant? You look like
I was just going to ask how big a den is.
Well, most of them are not much bigger than just big enough for the bear to get into. And if you look at some of the dens, especially the entrance, it's impressive what they can do.
They digging out ground?
Sometimes. That's more rare. There's so many cavities in a bear's home range. And they know their home range. They know everything.
It could be in a tree, base
Yeah.
of a tree. It could be high in a tree. It could be
Yeah, it could.
under some fallen debris, right? It could be a cave.
Some cavity associated with a blowdown is the most typical.
So the
cavity.
root mass of the tree comes up.
Pulls up and they go in under there.
Yeah.
And that's very common. But if you're a 2-year-old female, the smallest bear that's on its own, in like our northern study area, what we would expect you to be in the base of a hollow cedar and going in a hole about that big.
My goodness.
About 6 inches triangle between 2 roots. And then once you're in there, you push all your leaves that you've gathered and put in there up against the entrance. And then the rain comes down and freezes solid, and you're safe.
Encased right in there.
Yeah.
So they take some time to prep that den. It's not just
they
climbing a hole.
Yeah, they gather bedding and scrape it up and put it in. And in our 2 southernmost study areas, one just east of Bangor here, about an hour east of Bangor, and one just north of Bangor, those 2 areas don't get a ton of snow, predictably. And about a third of those bears make a ground nest, and a ground nest looks like a big bird's nest on the ground.
Wow.
And they have no shelter, really.
They just curl up in that.
Yeah, and they're often in a thicket, so they get a little bit of protection that way, but not always. And sometimes they're out in the middle of a bog where you can see them 150 yards off, just peeking up out of their crater of snow that they're in.
Wow.
6-7 months open to the weather, giving birth to cubs in the coldest time of the winter.
No
This
kidding.
is amazing, yeah.
Is it true that they can convert the metabolic byproducts of their sleep into protein and maintain muscle mass?
Yeah, they can, and that's also unique to bears as well. They're able to take the byproducts that we'd refer to as in the urine, urea, and take that apart and then put it back together and make the building blocks of protein.
So that's why a spring hunt, which we don't have in Maine anymore, but in some areas they do, you could get good eating bears they still have muscle mass. It's not like they've emaciated away.
Exactly. And
That's
I
amazing.
can't speak personally to that, but I know that I hear it so consistently. I have to believe it's true that spring hunted bears, or the meat is superior to fall hunted bears in places where they do both.
Wow.
People at least believe in that, and I have a hard time believing that the meat could be any better.
Yeah, I know. The meat's so good, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating. I was recently with Ethan Lamb, yeah, hunting moose.
Yeah.
Roach, you call him?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Now, by the way, he had a funny story for me about you offering, what do you call it, swamp onion to some folks.
Yeah, bog onion, yeah.
Bog onion.
Yeah, that's mean.
That is me, Jack in the pulpit. Yeah, that's a rough one. But anyway, funny story. Ethan was telling me, he was just saying that black bears are like the premier forager in the woods.
Totally.
And I was curious how many, again, as a hunter, you tend to focus on hard mast here in Maine because that's, or bait. What are they eating, I'm really curious to hear about what they actually do eat. How many plants do they know? How many foods do they know? And what does the arc of the year look like as far as feed?
Hey, we'll get back to the interview in just a moment, but first, I'm a big believer in using saunas to improve and maintain my health. In fact, I've had a clear light sauna in my home for almost 10 years now, and it's one of the ways I practice self-health care. I use it to detoxify myself from the industrial, chemical, and environmental pollution that's all around us, and to keep my immune system supple and strong. It's relaxing, meditative, and an incredible way to ward off aches and pains, increase recovery speed, and can even help with weight loss too. Clearlight saunas utilize ultra-low EMF, full-spectrum infrared heaters. These saunas are easy to assemble yourself or with a friend, and they make a size for any home or apartment. They're also gorgeous, made from natural, eco-certified woods. Mine's cedar, and I absolutely love the way it looks and smells. My sauna is like a refuge for me. It's a quiet place where I can go to restore myself mentally and physically. But it's got modern tech too, including a Bluetooth-enabled sound system so I can listen to music or podcasts like this one, and chromotherapy lighting systems that allow me to customize my healing experience. After 10 years, I can personally attest to the quality, ease of use, and the benefits of Clearlight saunas. In a world where self-health care is becoming more and more important, saunas are becoming less of a luxury and more of a health investment. To learn more about Clearlight saunas, go to healwithheat.com and use the coupon code WildFed. It'll get you $500 off your order, or you can use it to get an additional $100 off any of their sale prices. Again, it's healwithheat.com, and the coupon code WildFed gets you $500 off your order. Best of all, shipping's free inside the continental United States. Don't you think it's time you had a sauna at home? Check out Clearlight saunas at healwithheat.com. Now, back to the show.
There is no animal that's more complicated to try and characterize. What are the, just any number you want to pick, 20 most important foods to a black bear in Maine? And that's very difficult to answer. I've made some stabs at it. I get asked those type questions. It depends on where the bear lives in Maine, partly. Blueberries may be very important to bears in the Down East study area, and I'm sure that they are. but I don't believe blueberries are very important. It would be much lower on the list in our other 2 study areas, I'll put it that way. Acorns may be important to bears where oaks live, but a lot of our bears live where they've never seen an oak.
Yeah, north of the oaks.
Exactly, or apples. When you go back in the woods, these bears don't know what an apple is.
And those apples were brought here by Europeans, so obviously
Right.
predating that, they wouldn't have had access to that.
There
Black
were
cherries
some wild
and choke
apples.
cherries seem pretty
Yep,
important.
yep. Cherries are some years extremely important. So you talk about areas, and then the other thing is you have to talk about years. You can't say beech nuts are important when you can't find a handful of beech nuts on a full day of walking,
Right.
which is, in the old days every other year, and now 2 out of 3 years.
Yeah.
So beech nuts are only important when they're there. But when they aren't there, something else has to be the most important food. So for 1 week during the summer, let's say this bear is eating jewelweed for 5 days. Well, every bear out there in that area, given the choices that those bears in that area have, all of the bears there are eating jewelweed.
They'll just eat jewelweed.
Yeah.
The whole plant?
Well, they'll focus on it. And,
Man.
So
Jewelweed, for the listener, is it's pretty succulent. It's pretty slimy, succulent. It's like eating aloe.
Yeah, I may have chosen a bad...
no, I'm just that's interesting to me. I didn't know they ate it.
Well, the reason why I say jewelweed is because nobody would ever put jewelweed as the most important food. But that year, that place, that was the most important food for those 5 days for all the bears there.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So it doesn't matter what they're eating.
Okay.
Whatever they're eating, whatever their foraging strategy is, that's the best strategy because that's their job and they're very good at it. So how does that, let's say it is something like that for 5 days they're eating marsh marigold or they're eating a certain type of sedge for 9 days in a row and that's their focus. How important is that? 1 year it might be very important and the next year not so important, but then you have to look at, are they out of the den for 193 days? So each of those, even if you try to say each week what's the most important right now, is incredibly complex.
Yeah.
John Muir once said of the grizzly, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't know exact quote, but that everything except for granite provides food for grizzly bears.
Yeah.
And that could be said of black bears too. And people say, well, how's a pine... we don't have white bark pine here. How does a pine tree provide food for bears? I'll tell you just a couple examples. Pine trees feed squirrels. Everything's a lot of it's indirect. And squirrels, have, bears don't eat a lot of squirrels, so it still doesn't sound very important. But I'll tell you, when a pine tree falls or they harvest it and they leave the dead wood in the woods, pine trees are like the best for bears to eat grubs, that eat wood.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, they tear pine stumps apart all the time.
Right.
And logs rolling them over. And so it doesn't sound real important, but that year when the raspberries fail, that's all they're eating.
Right.
Because that's the best thing to eat right then.
Right. Okay.
Making me hungry.
I know. What kind of percentages? Well, I want to let me ask this about plants first. For me to harvest wild plants, I have to be taught. It's cultural knowledge. Mm-hmm. It's not instinctive to me. Some might be, I guess, when I was a kid, I would figure out some things. But how much of this is cultural and taught to them by mama, and how much of this do they figure out on their own?
An awful lot of it is passed down from the mother. And a lot of that is, look at here, kids. I'm taking you over here. This is where you want to look for your food this time of year, because this is the best place to find cherries or whatever. So it's a lot of the learning is locational. Bears are, that's super important to bears. Not so much knowing that you need to eat cranberries or you need to eat, when they're available, beech nuts and things like that. It's knowing where do you go get beech nuts, and where's the best place, because your prime age females, they know, they're old and they know, like I think of it like the old matriarch elephants, that when everything dries up, they have it back in their memory, some place where there's water.
Yeah.
These bears are like that. When things are tough, they're like, this is what you do.
Yeah.
This is where. And so, a lot of it's locational as opposed to they're eating so many different things. As they may be walking over here to get some sedge in the spring, but while they're walking over there, if they find a nest full of baby birds, that's bonus, So they're always, as they're going, always looking for food.
Sense of smell being their prime locator, or is that how they're kind of navigating food?
I think to some degree, yes. They're a tremendous sense of smell. I absolutely think they must sometimes be able to smell something as weird as it sounds, like acorns several miles away.
Yeah.
It seems that way. They're also able to pick up on what each other are doing.
Okay.
Based on maybe something that they're tracking around, or just leaving scats that are clues to what this bear knows something.
Right. Sometimes I'm impressed with how little digested the scat appears.
Yeah,
it seems amazing to me that they're getting much nutrition out of it, where they don't, don't appear to chew to the level that we do, right?
No, and
they have nice molars.
Yes, and it's like as if they're in too much of a hurry to bother.
That's what it looks like. Yeah, that's what it looks like.
But if you watch them eat, they're very, very delicate about how they eat. Most of what they eat is smaller than the end of your pinky, so it's hard to believe that they can take in that much small, like ant eggs, things that are so small, and the size of a grain of rice, and it's going to work out for them. But they forage around the clock, especially during the period in the fall where it's called hyperphagia, but they will...
hyperphagia would just meaning lots of eating?
Yeah, just like sort of,
Increased consumption?
The ultimate, they're up to 20,000 calories a day that comes through them.
Wow.
Which sounds impossible almost, because the stomach's basically the same size as ours.
How much bait did you say that your bear was eating?
He's eating like 5 gallons a night. Wow. That big bear that I showed you?
But not all at once.
No, he'd eat a bunch, lay around, come back, eat a bunch.
They volume in, volume out. They, like you said, they're designed to eat foods that are in great abundance, ubiquitous across the landscape in general.
Okay.
So when they're eating sedge in the spring, which people overlook that because it's just grass, right, that grows in the swamp. So it's not very sexy, but they're getting pretty good nutrition from that when they're eating that. And they couldn't possibly eat all of that sedge grass, right? It's just, but they'll eat continuously. And so they're kind of just, the digestive system's just kind of high grading. So they're bringing it in, moving it through. And, it's, when they're eating raspberries, they couldn't possibly eat all the raspberries. And when raspberries are abundant, there's no way that the bears could eat them all during that period that they're eating raspberries. So they're eating buckets of raspberries. It's like, it's almost continuous picking raspberries, and a little break, poop some out, and it's great.
Go back at it.
23 hours a day.
Their digestive system is, it's not like our cervids here, which are like ruminants. They have a digestive system similar to ours, right?
Yep, simple, yeah.
But they can digest, I eat a lot of acorns, more than most people. I spend 10 days detoxifying them first, right? So how are they mitigating the tannic acids and things like that? There's so much of what they eat seems inedible to me.
I honestly can't really explain that. I can't see how they can eat acorns, but deer do the same thing.
Yeah.
You have deer that are, they'll eat twigs and stuff because they're ruminants. But bears, you think they're more like us. How can they handle that? I can't tell you.
Don't know, yeah.
But hazelnuts are pretty sweet. They're nice.
Yeah, they're
beech
nice.
nuts
They
are
go
nice.
fast, though, yeah. The beech nuts good. I also notice, I'll see what looks like concrete, the beech nuts just accumulated in the stomach, but I don't see tons of the shells.
Not the burr. Yeah, the prickly part.
They're pretty good with their mouth parts.
Really good, amazing.
Because it's obviously not at their, like for me, it's my fingers that allow that, right?
Exactly.
I'm looking at their hands. It's like I'm thinking it's got to be what they do with their lips and tongue and how they manipulate these
absolutely,
objects.
yeah. And they have prehensile lips, and their lips are.
Oh, really?
Yeah, their lips are able to pick individual raspberries, individual blueberries, and they actually have an organ on the top lip that is able to. They can hold a piece of food and judge its nutritional value.
No way.
Yeah.
Through chemoreception or something?
There's a whole bunch of nerves that go to this organ. Ben Killam kind of discovered it, and it's I don't think it's fully understood, but it's something that not every animal has. But they're able to take something between their lips and kind of assess its value.
Yeah, that's
food.
Man, that's really stunning to hear that. Is it true in the spring that they're coming out, like you were mentioning sedges, and one of my hunting mentors is always talking about skunk cabbage. Is that true? They're coming out and feeding on stuff like that?
In places where there's skunk cabbage, there's basically no skunk cabbage in all three of my study areas. So I would say that skunk cabbage doesn't make the list there.
Yeah, interesting.
But that, it's very important in areas. It's just, we're just a little bit too far north for skunk cabbage. There's some here, some there, but by the time you get up west of Ashland, I've never seen a skunk cabbage up there.
Okay, yeah.
There's a plant that people call skunk cabbage. It's false
hellebore. Do they eat that?
Not that I'm aware of.
Pretty poisonous to people.
I've never seen that, but Jack in the Pulpit root, which you had mentioned.
Yeah, let's go back to that too. I made a joke earlier about you calling it bog onion.
Yeah.
So Jack in the Pulpit, which whenever I'm in the woods and someone sees it, they're always like, "Oh, that looks like food. What is that?" But I think it's oxalic acid or some calcium oxalate crystals that are in there.
Right.
Rip up your throat and mouth pretty bad.
Oh, geez, yeah, it's terrible. It's and it doesn't hit you right away. That's
exactly.
So you
looks like a little corn kernel sitting on that corn, right?
Yeah, man. There's food value there, but just like acorns, you have to do something to make it palatable. But bears don't. And if you think it's hard eating the acorns, or,
like beyond hard to eat, like if you eat a couple pieces of this and you're done eating, you can't eat it.
Yeah, that's true. Bears eat them.
Man, they're amazing.
I don't
creatures.
get that. I don't get that.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how they get by with that. Even hazelnuts. If you're picking those with your lips, how long would that take before
it hurts your fingers?
It hurts your fingers.
It's like
Think about your
prickly
lips.
pear or something.
Yeah.
You get all these little
fuzzy
hairs in you that
terrible, and they're doing it with their lips.
Man, it's incredible.
Hardy.
Well, how much of their diet? Okay, so we're talking about their foraging for plants, and then when I think of their omnivory, I imagine a lot of it isn't really hunting, but collection of larvae and invertebrates and things like that, right? So they must happen upon quite a lot of animal protein in the form of collection rather than hunting. How much is that? And then how do they do any actual hunting, as we would define it?
In Maine, probably not a lot. There is probably some bears in northern Maine in high-density moose population that I think probably really do look for moose calves in the middle of
when
May.
They drop.
Yeah.
Arthur Haynes, a botanist friend of ours, was telling us he had seen a moose with just bare rakes down the back that had escaped or something.
Yeah.
But that would have happened when that moose was young?
What I've seen is lactating cows that are trying to defend their young.
Oh, okay.
And I've seen them scuffed up real bad. One spring, I saw 2 that had broken ribs and punctured lungs. They were going to die. And they had real clear claw marks from bears. And those 2 cows were both lactating females. So it seems logical to me that they allowed to interact with the bear trying to protect their calf.
Okay, but the bear's probably after the calf.
Yeah.
What about deer, like fawns for whitetails?
Absolutely, and that's been shown in studies. In New Brunswick study and a Pennsylvania study, both came out about the same, as the bears were kind of neck and neck with coyotes, not a lot of difference in terms of predation on neonatal, near birth, very young fawns.
So they know when those fawns are dropping, and they're out looking for them.
I think that some bears do, and it's just, and maybe other bears just randomly coming upon one.
Okay.
But I do think some bears are probably a little bit more specialist when it comes to moose calves or deer fawns.
Okay. Do they fish here?
Very little, and I don't even know. It may have a lot more historically.
When we had salmon runs?
Yeah, salmon runs, but we still have like LY runs and
just for the listener
suckers.
who's not familiar, these are, well, like when our suckers come in, I mean, they're in 2 feet of water. They're not hard to get a hold of.
No.
When our alewives come in, I mean, you could just walk out and just start scooping them in your mouth when they get so dense.
Yeah,
but we don't see bears feeding on them much?
Not a lot. I mean, I have seen some evidence of bear feeding on suckers. Never seen anything on smelts. Just because I haven't seen it doesn't mean it doesn't happen.
Yeah, right.
It doesn't.
But in 37 years of this, you haven't seen a lot.
Yeah, not a lot. I mean, in western states, the Pacific salmon runs, different Pacific salmon runs. Just like you see brown bears on TV, black bears do the same.
Okay, so part of that's regional.
Yeah, part of it is, and it could be that at once upon a time that they ate Atlantic salmon.
Yeah, we just can't know that right now.
No.
One of the things I hear is that if aside from humans, the sort of next predator for black bears is black bears.
Right.
Could you describe that in a sort of big picture sense of how that works and why we think that is and what that looks like in practice?
Well, I think why is sort of has to be conjecture, because you can't really ever a lot of that stuff you can't really prove what is behind it entirely, but big bears kill little bears, and it gives you a competitive advantage over other bears. It's like one of the best things that a bear could get is a smaller bear to eat.
He'll eat the bear.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's fully consumed.
Yep.
Cannibal.
Yep. Rare.
Males only, or both males and females?
No, I think both males and females, but primarily males. Yeah. Males are bigger, and a big male might kill a cub, but be able to defend itself against the mother.
Yeah.
Because the males are so much bigger.
Mm-hmm.
So
what lengths will they go through to get to one?
I don't think it's that common.
Okay.
It's just that it's kind of unusual among animals, among mammals. For it's called interspecific predation. It's not a common thing among mammals, but it's kind of an oddity among mammals, and I don't think it's a super common thing unless bears are at carrying capacity, at which time bears are stressed for food particularly.
They're starting to overlap a lot in their range.
Yeah, and I think it may be part of their natural population control mechanisms for the population, because they don't typically go through really big like disease outbreaks, or there are other ways that populations control themselves. Starvation being probably the most common, and a population left to its own devices, starvation be the number one cause of death, no doubt about it. But predation from larger bears would be probably the second highest cause of death.
Here in the Northeast, like, what's the weight that a male will top out at, and what's a female top out at? Like, what are the biggest by weight that you've seen?
The state record is 699.
That's dressed or that's live?
Live weight, yeah. Okay. Full body. And
wow, that bear I got was pretty close to that, I'd say. Wow.
Yeah. There's less of a percentage of when you dress a bear than it would be a deer or a moose,
right.
But it's getting over 500, you're getting into some of the largest males.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the females?
350 is very few females that go over that.
Okay.
And actually fairly few males that ever go over 500.
Yeah.
And so, but there's a big difference. Females are producing cubs and they just don't get as big. And there is a lot of individual variation. Like you'll have in the human species, we have Vince Wilfork for any NFL fans, and you have Danny DeVito. They're both humans.
Yeah.
But no matter how much you fed Danny, he would never look like Vince.
Right.
And no matter how much you held the food back from Vince, he would never look like Danny.
Yeah.
So we have a wider variety, probably genetically, than most wild animal species. But bears have a fairly wide variety in body shape, size.
Frame size,
Yep,
yeah. Okay.
Totally.
Oh, that's interesting, huh?
Can I just go back to diet real quick? A quick question. Do they ever eat mushrooms?
Oh, yeah, but there isn't a lot of calories in mushrooms if you study that sort of thing. So they're not going to waste a lot of time on something like that. They're more calorie driven. Males particularly are protein driven. Females, and certainly it depends on time of year, but when they're getting ready for dens, they get calorie driven. They get carbohydrates. That's what they're going for. So mushrooms don't offer too much of protein or carbohydrates, so tend not to be very preferred.
They'll take meat over a plant if it's easy.
Well, absolutely. That's there's no better return. Yeah, than animals are way better. Yeah. Should have turned it off.
All right.
I thought I would keep.
We'll let it roll through.
I kind of interrupted you.
Oh no, it's okay. I'll let that ring. I just want to ask about the big males, and then it's okay. We can go into talking about hunting a little bit. Is that all right? Or
Sure,
at least, or into management.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. It's really interesting stuff, huh?
Yeah.
Getting our real questions answered.
Well, they're the most interesting animal, I think. I mean, I guess you can't say.
They've got that like meditative thing in the den.
Yeah.
They can turn pee into muscle.
Yeah. Exactly.
They've got that organ on their lip.
They're physiologically unique, and they're some similarities to humans, so there's a fascination there. Relatively same size as people somewhat, and all of that, and they're very intriguing. I think people, there's more misinformation about bears than there is real information. Most of the misinformation is easier to believe it or not. It sounds more logical.
What are some of the most common things that you hear that you're like, well, that's not true, but here's one that makes me laugh so much. Right? And the accent, I got to say it in too. I can't say it in my actual voice. I have to say it like this. You see, a bear is a member of the pig family.
Absolutely. Yeah. Closely related. Yeah.
Is that because of trichinosis?
I don't think so.
People just think we've been calling them tree pigs.
That one there stymies me.
Yeah.
They couldn't be further, hardly. I mean, they're if you go back through the classification, bears are kind of out by themselves on a limb.
Okay.
From most mammals. You have to go all the way back. Class Mammalia, they're a mammal. The next one before that is family, and family is Ursidae. So all bears are in the same family. That makes sense.
Are you of the opinion that panda is in Ursidae or is a raccoon? I know this is outside your content.
Yeah,
continent.
I know. This is classification is just something fun to argue about for centuries. But and a lot of this classification's not really based on any genetic thing or anything. Right. It's like morphological or physiological a lot of times, which I think physiological is easy to defend. But bears are so unique physiologically. But so the family is bears, and then you get to order. And in order, that's the first time where you see something that tells you something, and they're in the order Carnivora, which is carnivores.
Yeah.
So even though they don't
That's morphological. Right. That's their skull more than it is their diet, right?
Their gut.
Okay.
A simple gut and, teeth and stuff. But they're able to be very effective predators, and in some parts of their range, they're very predatory. So, but in general, no, they don't do a lot of predating on anything. But they have all the gear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They're set up for it.
Yeah, it's interesting though what foragers they are, given the appearance and reputation that they have.
Yeah.
Any other big myths you hear about bears that you wanted to sort of throw out there?
I like the pig one. I mean, that's
funny,
that just stymies me. But the worst thing that bothers me more than anything else is that you can stop 10 guys downtown Bangor and ask them, what do you think about eating bear meat? And if all 10 of them don't say bear meat is terrible,
greasy,
can't be greasy, you hear that all the time.
Stringy, gamey.
Yeah, it's not gamey.
No,
it's actually not gamey at all.
What does gamey even mean?
Well, you get that funky, musky thing that people, you get tarsal gland.
I have a
meat.
sense of what gamey means. Yeah. Grew up on deer meat. At one point, when I was first getting out and eating domestic food like cows and pigs, I thought of deer meat as like prison food. Now I appreciate it again, but growing up on it and having it all the time, that's gamey. Deer, you can't slide a deer past me. I know it's deer. Mm-hmm. You could slide bear by me, but I appreciate it so much.
Yeah.
But bear, you could argue that that's beef.
Yep.
You could fool anybody, and I have many times.
Mm-hmm.
That's beef because that's what it's most like. But people will say, well, it's a lot like pork. Well,
it's not like
not
pork
at all like pork.
The only thing that's pork-like is that you can make lard from them, Yeah. That's like the only pork-like thing.
That's awesome, too. Bear grease is awesome.
That's what I've been cooking now 4 years with it, and
that's awesome.
I'm so sold on it. That's what led me to hunt them in the first place.
There's nothing else in the world like bear grease. And there was a time when that was the most valuable part of the bear.
I was going to say, when you were talking about the early settlers, hunting them off for, over territory and stuff, I was thinking, well, they must have benefited tremendously from that fat because what a resource.
You can't go down to the Shop and Save and buy like a gallon of Crisco or back in that day, you couldn't go get some olive oil. Mm-hmm. And that bear grease, can you imagine how valuable that was?
And it's so mild in flavor. I mean, it's not like tallow where it's not awesome. Waxy. It's so smooth.
It's so special.
It's so clean.
It's rich, and it's so special. I'm with you on that. I don't think there's anything else like it. I really think that if people were to take it for its virtues and be exposed to it, there would be a lot of people. We wouldn't have any trouble controlling the bear population if all the rednecks, that we have in Maine figured out how good bear are to eat.
Yeah,
we'd have no problem. And so we're. I don't understand it entirely. I think it stems from back in the day, people didn't have good access to refrigeration, and bears need to be cooled down. If they don't, they'll spoil. You can't treat them like a deer or a moose. You can get away with a lot more with a deer or a moose than you can with a bear. But if you keep that bear from spoiling, it's the best meat by far, the best eating of any wild game, in my opinion. I like birds, I like partridge, but there's nothing that compares to bear to me.
Man, we both want to talk a lot about this one. I just want to say real quick that I think a lot of bears come out of the woods ungutted. They get dragged for hours. People are just thinking about hides and skulls, and so they leave that animal really warm for a long time, and I think that's part of the problem.
Yeah, I think that probably true that a lot of people have tasted spoiled bear meat or some bear meat that's starting to turn, because that's the only explanation you can come up with.
Yeah, because otherwise it's delicious.
It's totally.
Yeah, and my wife who grew up in Montreal on like croissants and whatnot, I mean, she's like a litmus test for me. Is this actually good, or is it just that I like unusual things? And she loves eating bear. I mean, it's like one of her favorite things to eat. So, that clears it for me that like if she likes it, everybody will like it. There's nothing weird going on with it. I think it's just delicious.
I think in general you can get guests to eat partridge, ruffed grouse, because it's like not chicken. That gamey. It's like chicken, and you can get people to eat bear meat, but you might have a harder time getting people to eat deer, moose, rabbit, snowshoe hare. I don't know.
Yeah, because of the flavor of the meat.
Those are all a little bit gamey. They have people like lamb, right? To me,
lamb's a real gamey.
That's what I was going to say when we were talking about gamey. That's the only meat that I've ever really had where I'm like, oh, that's
strong
gamey.
flavor.
Strong.
Yeah, I got to kind of try to eat it. Mm-hmm. I was going to ask you if you ever have or do eat bear meat that's rare.
Yeah, I have. And I don't often, but steaks.
You got to worry about that trichinosis, right?
Right, but from what I know, it appears to be very low risk.
I mean, I find worms sometimes.
Well, yeah, but not in the meat you're talking about?
Yeah.
So it's not from the trachea?
It could be.
Very fine.
Very fine.
Very look like
thin,
rice noodles.
Long, fine.
Yeah, rice noodles are exactly translucent.
Thinner, though. Yeah. Thinner than a rice noodle, but yeah. Vermicelli.
Probably the ones that live in the trachea.
And they've gotten sort of mixed in somewhere.
Well, they because
when you cut a bear, when I cut a deer, or I was telling you cut a moose the other day, I am absolutely very clear where I am at and what I am looking at anatomically. I know what muscle I'm looking at. Yeah. You start getting into cutting a bear, and it's like you can get lost in there. Like, what the hell am I looking at? Because all the fat and connective, it starts to look really weird in there, and things get a little mixed up sometimes.
Right.
But I am hyper vigilant and paranoid about trichinosis, I have to say. So I'm interested to hear what you have to say and how common it is. Have you guys looked at that?
Obviously, you can never, regardless of how minuscule the risk may be, you would never, I can never recommend somebody eat.
Add disclaimer here.
Yeah, and it's I don't know. It could be possible that you could have a piece of the diaphragm tested to ease your mind, because it tends to concentrate in the diaphragm on the bear.
No kidding.
We tested many bear in Maine over a number of years, a long time ago. So it may not be as applicable to today because things could have changed. But back then, we never, ever got a positive case.
What?
Never? Not once?
Because, when I'm cutting a deer or a moose, I'm eating rare meat. I like to eat the meat raw. I mean, I enjoy that.
Yeah.
And when we cut bears, it's so hard not to. The meat looks so good. And if I could, is there somewhere that we could send that?
I bet there is.
Okay.
I bet there is. I can't tell you.
A home testing kit?
Yeah, home test kit.
No, that'd be nice.
Because it'd be nice to know. I'd like to eat steaks and stuff. I end up grinding a lot or stewing everything, braising everything because of the fear of that. And,
right.
So what's it like rare?
Tell us. You can just hear your mouth watering.
You know what it's like. It's like the best cuts on you. It's just, I think bear's just like very, very good grass-fed beef or something. It's, I always tell people it's organic. There's no hormones. There's no growth hormones. No antibiotics. Shade grown for sure. So you can't. It's fair trade. The whole works. So you can't get any better. But. It's an issue. The meat eater ran into up to in Alaska. I actually watched him cooking that meat and said, "Yeah, it's raining." Yeah, he didn't cook that.
They all got trichinosis.
Yeah,
from
they
that.
did. Yeah.
Wow.
So it's. I think it's somewhat rare, and strangely, it's more common. From what I understand, it's more common further north.
Okay.
And I don't understand why. But.
Yeah, because it would have to come from eating an animal that had trichinosis, and you're not going to get that from a fawn. So you'd have to be scavenging on something that had eaten.
It would make sense to me that the feral swine and wild hogs and stuff in the south could be carriers or help contribute to that, but I still haven't read anything about it. But I guess for bear roasts and bear stews, it doesn't make any difference. But
the people that we hunt with, we've got kind of a crew that we hunt bears with, and everybody's interested in meat. That's why they hunt, and that's
Right.
what our focus is. Trophies come if they happen. It's incidental to the hunt. However, that means that whatever bears we come across, we tend to take. And I wanted to ask about, because it's important to us to be conscientious stewards of our resource, means we're taking bears across a pretty broad age class.
right.
And I wanted to ask about your opinions on that versus, let's say, I got a friend who owns 1,600 acres and he manages for deer, and they only will take bucks over 8 points, let's say. That's how they manage. For me, I always look at that as like, well, it's a little bit different than how nature works. It's
Right.
kind of the opposite of how nature works.
Yeah.
And I focus on, I'd rather eat a younger animal anyway because of the bioaccumulation of cadmium and mercury and all that kind of
Sure.
stuff, right? So for me, it's like I just take what presents itself to me. That's kind of how I like to hunt.
And it tends to be younger.
It tends to be younger,
This is-
precocious animals, right? That
10
take more
times
risks.
10 times as many button bucks as there is
Right.
8-pointers.
So how do you feel about that with the hunt? Do you think it matters? Do you have if you could sort of wave a wand and everybody would hunt the way you want as far as taking of age class, how do you see that? Like, because I mean, do you think like, oh, it's unethical in some way at a biological level to take a yearling versus an older bear?
No,
Or think it
I
doesn't
don't
matter?
think so. No.
Our age class is diverse enough to sustain that.
Yeah, they are. We end up harvesting 55 to 57% male every year. So on the ground, there's a lot more females than there are males because over time they live to be 25 or 35 years old. So I don't. At the level that we harvest bears, we have no concerns, and basically, it's our job to protect the population's, health, number one, and to over time, not to allow anything to get too far out of whack.
Right.
But any bear that presents itself to me is ethical to harvest.
Male or female doesn't
Male
matter
or
to you.
female. It's impressive how much the hunters will not take a female with cubs. Never, hardly ever. I mean, you can hardly find anybody to ever do that.
Yep. It's definitely frowned upon culturally.
Yes.
The only place where I've seen it was there was a specific population I hunted with in North Carolina who they didn't seem to care. They were like, well, we'll just take the sow and the cubs. And I was like, wow, I'm out of here. I don't know where this is.
Well,
I'm not sure about this.
Pennsylvania takes them out by family plan, but in Pennsylvania, the cubs might be 120, 140 pounds.
Yeah. Okay.
So
More like what we'd say a yearling here. Our hunting methods here. So we have baiting, we have hounding, we have the general hunt. People I would imagine, is incidental to deer hunting most of the time, but maybe they still hunt.
Right.
And then we have trapping. I just was curious if you would comment on the pros and cons of. Let's assume that they're all legal and we assume they're all ethical. Could you just comment pros and cons, maybe from the wildlife management perspective?
Well, basically, we have pretty liberal methods. We allow a wide range of opportunity for bear hunters.
Over the counter too, which I think is pretty cool about Maine.
Yeah. So our forests in general, not down where we have too many deer, but where most of our bear live, where we have less deer, are very thick and very difficult to hunt for bear without using some tool or method, basically, that will allow you to have some reasonable amount of success. We don't have a ton of bear hunters. We have a little over 10,000 bear hunters total. About half of those come from out of state. So we need to get some way to get bears to expose themselves in a way that they can be cleanly and ethically dispatched and harvested. So use of bait allows that for the majority of our harvest. And so when you're hunting a bear over bait, about 30% of people are successful, so about 70% aren't. So from a sporting standpoint, those 70% that don't get a bear over bait would consider it plenty sporting. And if
and thanks for your license money, because
Yeah.
it's supporting
Yes.
the biology.
Totally. And so we have a season like this where there's a lot of natural food, and bears aren't really going to bait very
and they
much.
shut off of it early. Well, can I ask a question? I know this is like, there's a lot of politics here, and maybe that's a little bit lost in some of the listeners, but that, you know, we had our big referendum, and there was a lot of argument back and forth on whether or not to ban these hunts and everything, and so it's a very politically loaded thing. And I have, as somebody who's for the hunt, but I do have some questions about it. So I know you may have to tiptoe through this, and forgive me, but one question I have about, I took my first bear over bait. I put 3 tons of bait on the ground this year, so I'm not against the bait. I do wonder about what impact it has calorically on the landscape and how it affects. One thing I often wonder is if we're trying to bring our bear population down a little bit, doesn't it increase litter size? And so that'd be the first part. And second part is, a lot of it is food I would never feed my kids. And these animals live so long. I wonder nutritionally the impact on, you know, from the perspective of getting like lots of sugar calories and no minerals out of this food or something like that. How does it affect their teeth and bones? And is there any concerns? I know some states have, is it Pennsylvania that only allows whole food? Like it can't be processed food.
North Carolina.
North Carolina.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. When I hunted there, it was all like raw peanuts that we had to use.
Right.
and
You
stuff.
can't roast the peanuts as processed.
Right.
Yeah.
So how do you feel about kind of all that I've just said there? Or can you sort that out a little bit?
Yeah. Well, from it seems like when people hear you put all this bait out, it sounds like, wow, that's got to have a major impact on the bear's condition. And where the bear's eating 20,000 calories a day,
Yeah.
it really doesn't. During that period when you're baiting is when they're
fairly
feeding
short
the
baiting
harvest.
That's only
season here.
4 weeks, right?
Yeah.
Some,
4
some
weeks
states
plus,
go long. Yeah.
Well, 4 weeks pre-bait and then 4 weeks of hunting, and
Okay.
you can
You don't have
continue
to clean
to
up
bait,
till November
but-
10th anyway.
Yeah, but just because it was easy in my northern study area, we have 5 outfitters and 1 private group of hunters that non-commercial hunt, but just kind of typical kind of mix of in the North Maine woods out in the unorganized territory there. And so I was able to call, basically 6 phone calls and ask them, how much bait do you use per bait site? Talk to North Maine Woods, find out how many bait sites are in each town and who has each bait site. And in the end, I've done this twice, about 10 years apart. And both times it came out to, because these guys are trying to make money. They're not like you. You're not. They're trying to make the bottom line, be
Right.
efficient. And
These are big. They got a lot of sites they're leasing.
the commercial hunters and the private hunters a little different, because these private hunters come from away. They're not baiting in their backyard. So anyway, the end result is both times roughly 1 cup of bait in terms of volume, 1 cup per acre. And so
Okay, so that's not really that much more than a few raspberry plants or something.
yeah, it's almost like if you had an apple tree and it had 1 more apple, or you picked an apple and ate it, that would upset the apple cart,
Right, right.
And so it's less than people think, because it is a lot of volume. It's a lot of bait when you look at the big picture, but you got to realize it's an awful big state.
Yeah.
And in that particular area, which I think is pretty representative of the big woods in general, there's only about 16 baits per township on average, and That is, and that, that's 24,000 acres. And so, and they're not going to spend, burn extra gas and lug more bait than they need to be efficient about it. And so in the end, we see no evidence of it really changing things significantly, or even to a point that where you could detect it. I can tell you last year was a poor food year. Had bears denning during the baiting period, had bears dying, year-old bears dying the next spring.
Wow.
So for those 3 bears that I picked up the collar and saw the skeleton, the donuts didn't get them over the hump. Now, that's not to say that a couple of other year-old bears might have just barely made it by the skin of their teeth because they got some trail mix or whatever. I can't tell you that, but I can tell you that bears still die of starvation.
Even with food being put on the landscape.
Yeah. And yearlings' weights can go anywhere from 25-pound average to 65-pound average. So, that's natural food that's doing that variation, because it's in an environment of stable bait amounts. The amount of bait sites has gone down a little bit from the peak, but it's pretty stable. If you look at it, the number of bait sites doesn't change a lot. The number of hunters don't change a lot. So we don't see a lot of changes there, but we see changes that are driven by natural food on our bears. They're pretty dramatic changes.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. All right, so, and then what about the quality? Do you think that is that not a big deal to you, or do you think that there should be some looking at that?
Okay, that's a good thing, because people like to say, oh, you're feeding them junk food, and it's like, I wouldn't feed my kids that. It's like, of course you wouldn't. These bears are not people, and when they're looking for protein, or they're looking for calories, carbohydrates, that's the most healthy thing they can eat. For us to eat carbohydrates, to eat high caloric foods, it's not healthy.
Trying to wolf down 20,000 calories of Little Debbie's.
That's not healthy.
Yeah.
For bears, it's very healthy.
Okay. Their metabolism can tolerate it, because that's what they're looking for.
Differently, yeah, totally.
Yeah. What about with the hound hunt? Any ups or downs with that? That's mostly how I hunt now, and I really enjoy it.
Yeah.
But boy, that feels even more controversial to me.
It
seems like if they had split that referendum, well, I don't even want to go there.
Yeah.
Just curious, ups and downs as a manager with hounds.
Well, see, we're in a position where we need all 3 major types of harvest methods. And there may be some ways of doing it. If you retain bait, you're retaining a high percentage of your harvest. But right now, using trained bear dogs is gaining every year. It's becoming more and more important to our final numbers.
What is the management goal right now? We're at what, and what would be your sort of ideal number?
Well, I think we should be seeing, it varies and it changes all the time, but probably somewhere around 4,000 is what we should be hoping for.
For harvest.
And
we tend to be around 2,000?
Around 3,000,
okay.
Yeah. Last year, 3,300. This year, probably 2,400. This may be one of our worst years, maybe 2,500.
Oh, no kidding.
But it's it's long term.
Yeah.
Because everything with bears, they live a long time.
Yep.
So they take those blips, cub failure or a tremendous cub flush. Those things don't affect things too much. You kind of have to look at blocks of time more and just kind of average it out, the good years and the bad years. And that's just the way that bears are kind of set up biologically, and it works. It works for them, kind of being a long-lived animal, live about 2 to 3 times as long as most animals their size.
All right. So you said that hounding is gaining ground again.
It's increasing.
Yeah, no kidding.
In number. Yeah. I think we might have a record hound kill this year is what I would predict.
It's a very consistent way. like having sat over bait, my experience is that a lot of bears know better than to be on bait in the daytime.
Yeah.
And with hounds, where you can get at bears that have been feeding in the night. If you got good dogs, you can get to them.
Yep. Good dogs, well trained, and good houndsmen, and it's still a challenge, but it's and really it doesn't look like such a challenge if you go with a good houndsman with good dogs. But you don't realize what went into that.
Yeah,
Right.
years and years and breeding and
a lot of dogs that aren't that good.
Yeah.
A lot of houndsmen that aren't that good.
mostly houndsmen that aren't that good, right?
Yeah, because the dogs are always going to give it their all. But,
yeah. It's like who's been training them, and the hard work with the dogs is that they go often miles back. I mean, we put in 7 miles of mountain climbing the other day for one, and I mean and then you've got to cut the bear and pack it out on your back, and
it's not 7 miles walking down the road.
Yeah.
Right. I'd be in Hamden before you got halfway there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then trapping is an interesting one. I haven't participated in it, but in the state, it seems like trapping is on the decline in general, and it was very.
Bear trapping is increasing.
It is increasing.
Yeah.
When we took our trapper safety course, which was very hard to get into, as opposed to like there's plenty of hunter safety classes. Trapper safety is a little less available. We did manage to get into one last year, and most of the people in there wanted to trap bears. That's why they were there. Mm-hmm. So it seems like that was what was driving people to get into trapping, was the desire to get a second bear.
No doubt about it. Every time I go to trapper training, it's something like 2/3 of the people there just so they can go trap bears.
Yeah. Do you know offhand like what the percentage breakdown is? What percentage of bears are taken with these different methods out of the total that are taken?
Probably going to see something like 750 bears taken with dogs this year, something like 1,800 bears. No, we're not even that high. I think it's more like 1,600 bears were taken by bait, I think, this year. Might have been 1,700. Last year, we had 1,300 bears taken over bait the first week.
Wow. Because there was so little food on the ground.
Right. And an early denier, so they were hitting the peak of the feeding.
Yeah. Okay. Where I was at, it was you just hang around the cornfields. They're just coming in and out like traffic,
What about trapping?
Trapping is this year probably going to be up around 160.
Oh, it's really not that many, huh? I'll get to that. For the listener, Maine allows you to take one bear by hunting and one bear by trapping. So theoretically, you could have 2 bears if you have a trapper's license.
Under current regulations,
right.
Yes.
That's the next thing. Actually, before we go there, because I like what you just said, how many are taken during the general season? In other words, how many people are either still hunting bears or are deer hunting and have a chance encounter with a bear?
It's really a small number. I should go get a piece of paper over there and give you the numbers for 2017 anyway, maybe 2018. I've got one over there. But it's we ask those questions now when you register the bear, and we have some that are unknown method, but not very many. And it's about 30 or 40. Like this year would be a little higher because this year there's more opportunity to go free range of bear.
Yeah.
And if enough people were doing it.
More opportunity because there's just more food? Or
yeah, they're out of the den, and they're up on the beach ridges and, out foraging all through deer season. So our deer hunters, last year our deer hunters took 12 bear.
That's it?
Yeah. So there's 100.
This is important for the people who don't understand. For people who are like, well, why do you have to bait them? Why do you have to hound them? It's because we would have a very difficult time managing them in a general hunt. This is not Alaska where we can see them up on the hillsides and stalk in on them.
That's another cool thing about the animal hunts. Like they're ninjas.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, the black ghosts. So there's 170,000 deer hunters, and they're able to put 12 bears.
That's incredible. Wow. I mean, because I just think about when I'm hunting, I have one time jumped a bear hunting.
Jumping them's one thing.
I had no shot, by the way. If I had been planning to see one, absolutely would not have had a shot.
So then
I thought it was a bird going by in the woods at first. It was just moving so fast up the hill. It just was a blur. And then I had to go and find the tracks to confirm to myself that it was, in fact, a bear.
So there was 30 bears that were hunted intentionally by stalking?
Well, that doesn't mean that
roughly,
intentionally, right?
Yeah,
That could have been
yeah.
they were sitting in a tree stand looking for deer, and a bear
Well, you
walks
said
across.
12 of them
Yeah.
were deer hunters.
Yeah, no,
I
there
gotcha.
are people who indicate that they didn't use bait, they didn't use dogs, and they didn't use a trap.
So you got to
And
factor
they
out the ego too. So
Yeah.
that's another 10.
Yeah.
and they shot the bear outside of deer season. So there are some people that do target bears, cornfields, apple
Yeah.
orchards.
Uh-huh.
There are oat fields up
Or they
north.
got one that's just been in their backyard, and the season comes around, and they're finally going to get it out of the chicken coop or whatever.
Yeah.
Somebody
So
like
that's
you, would you feel confident like finding a bear and being able
With
to
your
hunt it?
skill set,
With
I
your
guess.
skill set, right?
Given time, yes, but my success rate probably be a little higher than 3%, but in general, the success rate tends to run 3% or less
Wow.
for people not using the other techniques. So even though, the bait average is 30% success, it's 10 times or more, 15 times more successful than not using bait. So
So that puts it into perspective a little bit. A bear biologist who's been doing this for 37 years is maybe 4% likely to get a bear.
I think this year I probably could, but over the long
Yeah.
run,
Yeah.
last year, I had been out there way before the leaves were off.
Right.
It had been hard to keyhole one into what are they eating, what are they doing right now, and is it open enough that I'm going to be able to get a good, clean shot for
Right.
a good, clean kill.
I want to ask you this. If you, again, magic wand, right? If you could choose a weapon and a caliber for people who are shooting bears at the close ranges that you'd see at a bait site or hounding, because I get the impression that you, while you're very supportive of the hunt, you also are very caring about bears. Do you have sort of something that you'd be like, this? I mean, because I've seen them taken with bow. I've seen them taken a couple times with 223 rifles, which I was like,
Right.
I don't really like watching that. Pistols, different things. What would you sort of recommend to somebody who's listening to this who goes, man, I want to eat bear meat. I want to hunt bears. What kind of, I don't mean to get you so down in the weeds, but do you have a recommendation that you think is most ethical?
Well, just in a general sense, think penetration, so that you have a much better chance of an exit wound. So think about that. I'm kind of nostalgic. I like old. I like 3855.
30, I don't even know the round.
Yeah, it's government 4570.
It's a bolt action?
4570.
Oh, okay.
Even
Yeah,
better.
yeah.
Government round. But it's what you need to think about, and don't fool around with trick shots of any sort.
Yeah.
Try to hit both lungs.
Yeah.
That's it's plain and simple.
When we sat down with Kelsey Sullivan, he was talking about how many, at that time it was 2 birds in the spring, 2 birds in the fall, either sex in the fall. And he was sort of saying, well, that might change. And then this year we see the regs and there's 5 birds, either sex in the fall. Lot of questions being asked now. Are we going to see, every time I hear about bears, it's about the overpopulation and that we're past social carrying capacity and all this. Are we going to see a spring hunt? Are we going to see a second bear tag available?
I think probably you'll see some more opportunity in the future. Don't like using the word overpopulated because they're still very healthy at this point.
Okay.
But we know the bears are going in a direction to a place we don't want them to be.
Trending upward.
And we don't know where that is. How soon before we're going to start seeing those negative effects on the bear's health, on the number of conflicts with people, and all that is going to increase. The bear's health's going to decrease, or you're going to see health effects at some point. And when you see health effects, you're going to see behavioral problems as well. You have starving bears in the population. So bears starve now, but there'll be a lot more starving when you have a lot more bears. So yeah, they're just creeping in that direction, and we don't know exactly where that hits the wall. And with bear foods being so variable, from year to year. That's another issue, because next summer could be droughty, and that could be a very difficult time for bears, even with the number that we have now. So, yeah, I do expect more opportunity in the near future, but as you brought up before, it's politically charged. Anything about bear hunting, I don't totally understand why that is, but, when we started hunting moose, that was politically charged, but it seems like people accept it pretty readily now, and deer hunting, seems fairly well accepted, I think, but for some reason...
Bears are so charismatic to people, though, huh?
They are, yeah.
And anthropomorphic compared to a deer.
Yeah, I totally get it, yeah. I
get it. I hunt them pretty heavily now. I love eating them, but I feel a little bit differently about bears.
I think bears are very special.
Yep, I agree. But before I start to kind of wrap a bow on things, Grant, do you have
How is
anything?
population calculated for bears?
Well, it's complicated, but we use basically a computer model, but we have very good inputs to the model. All models are good, right? They produce output. Computer will figure out what you can, it'll do all the extrapolation for you. But they're only as good as the data that you put into it. The numbers you put into it, the better they are, the better the output is. And we have a really big telemetry study on bears. We're putting our hands on a lot of females every winter. So we got a pretty good estimate of the productivity of females for cubs, and also the survival of the cubs that were born last year. That's something that's somewhat unique to bears, but we're able to calculate that and put that into the program and see where we're at and balance that against the harvest, which everyone's required to register their animals. So,
and to give up a tooth.
Yeah, exactly. So we know the age of the bear. And so, yeah, we have good information to work with, but still an estimate. It's the way everything in wildlife is. We can't get all the bears to line up so we can count them. So.
It's a funny image, though.
It is.
But to sort of conclude that, there's a lot more data appears on bears than there are some other species when it comes to modeling this.
Yeah. Well, we have, as a department, Maine Fish and Wildlife, we have taken bear management very seriously and put money and effort into it to get the best information that we can to work with.
Yeah. With the changes that are happening on the landscape, with the changes that are happening, like stabilization of our climate or heavy deforestation, tons of development, just the trend that our civilization's going in. It seems like there are animals who are winners and animals that are losers in that equation, right? It seems like deer are a great winner in that. Bison have not been a winner in this equation or whatever. Rhinos are maybe going to go away except for zoos or whatever, things like that. Animals like crows and pigeons are going to always do well around us. Where do bears fit into that? Are they, when you look at a long-term view, when you take the long-term view of where things are headed for bears, do we coexist well enough, and do we create enough habitat that if we continue on this trend, black bears will continue to do well, or do you have any concerns about them long-term?
I really don't in Maine, and it's a pretty narrow focus. But bears are increasing all up and down the eastern seaboard. Most places are having a lot more conflicts with bears than we are, because the interface is greater.
I'm sure you've seen that video of those two giant males battling it out in the streets of Jersey and the suburbs.
Knocking the trash can over in the mailbox and everything, yeah. But that kind of situation is probably quite far off still for us before we see bears. They're very slow at pioneering into new habitat, and where most of our people live, we have very few bears living, and so it's a nice arrangement for both bears and people. And most of the things you mentioned are actually positive for bears. Development isn't, but Maine's, as long as we keep the black fly healthy, I don't think we'll ever see too much development. And so I think, timber harvesting tends, young forests tend to be more productive for food for bears. So timber harvesting tends to be a positive thing. Climate change should work in the bears' favor, in our favor, where we are closer to the northern end of the Bears Range than the southern end.
Interesting.
So, I can't really see anything other than
no major threats on the horizon to bears.
Not anything that really.
And not like we have like CWD with deer, for instance, that
Right.
we're concerned about. There's not really anything like that for bears.
Not really.
Man, that's amazing. That's like comforting to hear that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm really enjoying like cultivating the relationship that I have with this animal, and so, you're retiring when?
2 weeks.
2 weeks. So
Wow.
we're catching you at
Perfect timing.
as you wrap up a 37-year career working with bears. So if I gave you the floor to address the world with, hey, I've 37 years of working with these animals. Like, here's what I want people to know. Like, what's your fortune cookie summation of like what you want people to know about this animal and about the work that's going on?
Well, I would like to tell everybody that nobody's a bigger fan of bears than me. I know you may think so, but I'm like one of the biggest bear fans, and I'm not talking about Chicago. So my whole career, I felt a responsibility for maintaining the health of the bear population as collecting data, numbers basically, that help us be comfortable that we know what's going on, keep our finger on the pulse of the bear population and the health of that population. And I took that very seriously. And that is what Fish and Wildlife does. What biologists do when they're managing animals is nobody wants to see animals out of whack with the environment or the potential for the land to provide for them. And I think that harvesting bears is important to prevent bears from getting to the point where they're merely surviving and not thriving. And bears in Maine are very healthy and thriving. And I can compare it to other places across the country where that's not necessarily true. And I'm pretty proud of that. And it's been it's a painful struggle. They're the most misunderstood animal in the state. Most of what you know about black bears isn't true. And that's unfortunate, and one man's crusade can't change that. But little bit by little bit, one pallet at a time, people are figuring out that, harvesting bear for meat is good, and the bear population is strong and healthy, and that's where we want to keep it. And how we do that is harvest bears.
What's next for you, Randy?
Oh boy, I don't know, but I have a lot of options, and I'm looking forward to it. I won't completely fade from sight. Bears have been my life for so long, most of my adult life, and so I won't completely fade away. I'll be involved. I'll help teach the young kids what I know and help them carry on this study, I hope, for indefinitely. We don't see an end to it. It's a monitoring program. Keep our finger on the pulse of the bear population.
Is there anyone who can replace you? I've been asking around. I've been asking who's taking over, and everybody's like, "This is what I've been hearing from people." I don't know.
Well, that's flattering, but when I started, I didn't know any more about bears than the average person, and it took me a long time to figure it out. I'm a slow learner, so I think there's a lot of people, a lot of good people out there. Might need to be just a little bit on the crazy side of normal to put that kind of effort that I did over so long. I think a lot of times if I only had to work a 40-hour week, I'd probably go another 5 years. But it's not the way it works in this business. You're so committed to what you're doing that if you're not sleeping or eating, you're trapping bears or you're trying to catch one in the den. That's everything. So.
Well, as somebody who's come into bear hunting pretty late in my life, I just want to say thanks for the work you've done and making such a clear path. There's a lot of people who really appreciate the work you've done, and so thank you for making the space for us. I'm sure this next couple weeks is pretty busy for you, and I'm really glad we got the chance to talk to you before you, cleaned off your desk. So thanks so
Well,
much.
you can talk to me after too. It's been fun, Daniel, because we get along pretty good when it comes to I'm not always talking to someone of such like mind and understanding. You have a great understanding for someone, what I would say general for public, really.
Yeah, thank you.
You're
Yeah, a
a user,
layperson.
Yeah, you've really figured out a lot of this. I'm impressed.
Oh, thank you, man. Well, hopefully we can talk to you again after, and then we can pick your brain on all the stuff that's politically charged, and you won't be in office anymore, and we'll dig into some other stuff. But no, thank you so much for making the time. Really appreciate it.
You bet. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the WildFed podcast. You can help us grow this show by subscribing and leaving us a rating and review. It ensures better rankings and more advertiser interest, which translates directly into better shows, more awesome guests, and a constant stream of fresh, new content. Have a question you'd like answered on the show, or a hunting, fishing, or foraging trip you'd like to host us on? Email us at info@wild-fed.com. And be sure to visit our website, wild-fed.com, to check out the WildFed video show and store. WildFed. Food is all around you.